earlier.
Perfect, Anne. There's a couple of people that are admitting. So yes, welcome everyone. I'm really excited to be here again today. I see quite a few familiar faces. I say faces because sometimes we're on camera, sometimes we're not, but we become faces online to one another. So welcome back to those that are rejoining us from day 1 and 2. And for anyone new joining us, good afternoon and welcome. It has really been a positive engagement and academic engagement so far. As Anna said, my name is Marla, and it is indeed my honor to be your program director today. Anne spoke about asking questions, and I think it's really important that they say that we live in the world that our questions create. And I think that that is really critical, and to know that no question is a question that shouldn't be asked. And I think it's really important for us to engage as much as possible with our speakers who are offering of their time and their expertise. So our first speaker, which I'm very excited to introduce, is Prof Charlene Gerber, and the significance of paradigms in research paradigms, certainly something from conceptualization to method that I do think that students do definitely struggle with. And even as supervisors, some of us at times, find it a bit of a sticky space if it's something that is not a research paradigm that maybe is our area that we are used to working in. So Charlene will be discussing the significance of paradigms, key aspects of research paradigms that should be addressed, paradigms as a means to organize information, justify choices, etc., as well as, of course, the methodological implications. I think it's always fitting to just give a little bit of a background of someone, because they are here to offer a certain area or a subset of expertise. Prof Gerber is the MBA research head at the University of Stellenbosch and was GSB and acts as a research consultant as well. But for me, it's her interest in business research, research methodology, and within the field of marketing management, but just in general, her depth and understanding around business research and the importance of a methodological orientation and how we position this. So for her, research methodology is something that she has an absolute passion about. You can hear when she speaks about her presentation and just in general that the passion is certainly there. And I think that this not only assists those that she actually supervises, but the fact that she also does the doctoral research training programs for USB Ed, and she assists candidates to follow through. And we all know that following through with your PhD studies is really a tricky journey as well. So to offer her expertise today and to give us a taste into different frameworks and really how to operate within the research paradigms, I introduce to you and hand over to Prof Charlene Gerber to entice us this afternoon and really get our minds active. Prof Charlene, thanks, over to you.
Thank you, Marla. Thank you for the kind words. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here this afternoon. I do want to say I'm always humbled if I have to speak to a bunch of academics. I do find it easier to speak to practitioners. So I do want to say I respect my colleagues and hoping for an open discussion this afternoon, specifically with the plan that I have this afternoon talking about paradigms. I do want to acknowledge the presenters of yesterday and the day before. I rarely sit and make notes, and I find myself with a notebook just making notes. I try to use some of the things that you said in my presentation today. Forgive me if I misquote you or if I've paraphrased with a bit of creativity. So having said that, I put my hand up for research paradigms because it's been a big struggle for me my entire career, and this is now where I want to put on my disclaimer. Having taught business research methods, both undergrad and postgrad, for the last 20 years, and having read, I tried to count more than 6,000 research proposals in the last 20 years. I have really struggled with research paradigms. And because of that, I have a couple of notions that I would like to share this afternoon, and once again, open up what I would call discussion, where we as academics can talk and agree and disagree on how we go about dealing with research paradigms. But maybe before I go into too much detail, I would like to hear from you guys. So if in any way we can maybe just launch that poll, and I'll see if I can launch it from here. I'm for some obscure reason. Oh, there you go. Here I can.
So the poll will pop up on your screen just for you to respond to. And I did forget to also say that I have put it in the chat. Please pop your questions in the chat. I'll monitor the chat for Prof Charlene, and we will have lots of time for Q&A. And as Anne said, all questions are welcome. We're a diverse audience from different experience sets. So you will see that there's a questionnaire up now that you should be able to respond to.
Thank you, Marla. I wanted to see where my audience is, and I need to know what you guys think about it based on the discussion that I'm going to provoke this afternoon. I can see 35%.
Very interesting watching the percentages, Charlene, jumping up and down here on the screen.
Already about 60% are going as an absolute must. I expect my students.
I do like the makes my head hurt, because I think even if we think it's a must, it can make the head hurt as well.
Let's see, we only about 60% of you have answered. I'm hoping, so I'm guessing some of you who don't have PhD students, maybe just masters, you're also welcome to answer this, maybe based on how you answered it in your PhD or what your supervisor expected you to do. Yeah, we only 35 people. It feels like when I'm teaching online.
Well, we have a 70% response rate. I think that's pretty good.
Okay, then if Marla says it's good, I'm going to end the poll.
No, I can't answer. So, for example, some of us might not be able to because it hasn't launched in my direction. So, I think like Anne, myself, you know, we will be counted, but won't be able to maybe respond.
So I'm hoping that you guys can see the results. 65% of you say it's an absolute must. So this afternoon is going to be fun. I feel for the 11%, and the 22% of you going, well, it's a good to have, depending on the research question. I typically fall in that category, and the 3% of you going are not necessary. Let's see by this end of this afternoon whether we have a bigger group on those. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing. I will respond to questions afterwards if that's okay. I think Marla will manage that. So with a disclaimer, I do want to emphasize that in examining and or supervising PhDs, also having received at the business school, we receive anything from 500, between 300 and 500 PhD applicants a year. And of course, most of them do write some research paradigm in their method, their proposal. And it's based on those readings that I have, that I'm proposing, what I'm proposing this afternoon. Let's see if it can spark a great debate. And hopefully we will meet again at our annual business conference that we typically attend. And then we can just carry on with the debate. So having said that, sorry, I'm just trying to get my mouse to work. I like this quote, and it's based on me having taught research method and trying to help colleagues and other PhDs, not my students. I do like the quote of, if you would be a real seeker of the truth, you must at least once in your life doubt, as far as possible, all things. And when I deal with my PhDs, that is often, whether we're teaching or whether it's my own students, I do like that they have that kind of notion when they start dealing with their own studies. In dealing with my colleagues, students, what it was interesting, I was once asked by the Department of Accounting to come and teach or show some workshop on research methods. And the brief was, well, Charlene, seeing that you are a qualitative researcher, interpretive team, we would like to hear from you. We don't necessarily do research that you do because we're positivists. Then other colleagues of mine, specifically in coaching, said, Charlene, you know what, we would really like you to come and do a workshop for us. Not sure whether you would quite understand what we do because you're a positivist. And in both instances, I remember thinking, so I don't know on what grounds or what reasons I have been classified as either positivist or interpretivist, where they go, your research paradigm would make that you cannot understand what we're busy with. So maybe I'm doing something right in that I belong nowhere because of this notion that we have that you're either the one or the other, which typically in theory links back to the research paradigms. So having said that, based on this afternoon session, we don't talk about, well, research paradigms from conceptualization to method. So we conceptualize it and then we get to method. We would argue it. The significance of paradigms in research, key aspects of research paradigms that should be addressed, I'm guessing in the thesis, and paradigms as a means to organize information and methodological implications. So it is a given from most of my experience with many institutions. And I do want to say, I have learned that different departments, even different institutions, have different ways of looking at this. But within business schools and faculties of economic and management sciences, people often do, specifically on PhD level, want this research paradigm in some way or another being addressed. And in our master's program, we do have, we do invite many external moderators to come to and judge what we do. And every year the feedback is, Charlene, why don't you guys not include research paradigms in the research method? So if we now go, well, this is the status quo, this is what is being done, this is what is expected. What if the answers were, well, research paradigms is not needed. The significance of paradigms in research is not significant. If we look at the key aspects of research paradigms that should be addressed, no, you do not need to address them. Paradigms is a means to organize information. Nope, it's not helping. And finally, methodological implications of paradigm choices. Also, nope, not helping. In dealing with my more than 6,000 research proposals, I have never once come across one student that got this right, that actually understood what it was. And I can honestly say, dealing with many of my colleagues going, Charlene, but I don't know what a research paradigm is. Can you help me? Can you help me write this? So having said that, if we now need to talk about, what is a research paradigm really? I don't know if you guys are in any way aware of or have ever encountered the PhD comics. PhD comics is a website that have a collection of jokes, comic strips about what it is to be a postgraduate research student. They have many jokes about the professors too, but I thought I'll spare us some today. This specific one, I try and teach my students, show this in every lesson, some PhD comic. I do find that initially they don't think it's funny, but as the year progresses or time goes on, they start finding it funny and funnier. I think it's because they start feeling the pain of dealing with research and having to do postgraduate research, specifically on PhD level. I specifically included this cartoon here to go, in academia, we we're fond of words that and things that we use. Often was just passed on from one generation to the next, and doing certain things because my supervisor said so, and now I'm doing it. I do like to criticize our South African system in that we've not been really properly trained in research method. And by that is when I compare it to my peers that I have been fortunate enough to work with in some of the countries like Italy, as well as Germany and Netherlands. With having said that, please go check the PhD comic strips. This is Marla's quote yesterday. If we knew what we were doing, it would not be called research, would it? Why I show you this today is I often say to students, well, on record, this guy, Albert Einstein, was one of the smartest people on record. And he had this particular notion about research. So if he said, this is really hard, then I go, me as a mere mortal, whose brain will not be donated so that people can see how smart I was, if he had said this, then maybe we should just go, relax. It is this process of figuring out. And in this process of figuring out, I don't know what your undergrad teaching nor your postgrad teaching was, but as a BCom student, and then as a MCom student, not once did anyone teach me research philosophy. I didn't even have philosophy as an undergraduate subject. I didn't even have it as a postgraduate subject. I graduated at Potchefstroom University back in the day, and I followed the typical BCom route. We had what they thought was a subject on values, but it's not really philosophy. So if then, when I get to PhD, I now had to write something about research philosophy, what really would equip me as a PhD to say anything about philosophy if I'm in fact doing my PhD in some other discipline, so I become knowledgeable, skilled in some theory, as opposed to just merely the subject that I was busy with. So having said that, let's quickly talk about if we then say, research paradigms. I know it's quite complex, and my goal has always been to try and oversimplify things so that it can make sense to myself and often to the people that I'm trying to explain it to. Within the research paradigms, the popular ones that we typically talk about would be epistemology. Sometimes I hear people refer back to ontology, and then everyone uses this word methodology, which is, I would go, if it's a research proposal, we would probably use the word research method, not methodology, because now we're talking the study of the study. But with that, if you would allow me just to, for a quick, brief moment, to oversimplify, is if we say we agree that ontology would be this question about what is reality, and then epistemology is the question about what is knowledge, and then methodology is this question about how will I now investigate reality and or knowledge. Okay. Within that, this is how we now then define our research method, and then people will go, but now you're a positivist, or now but you're an interpretivist. And I've been sneaky. I've included pragmatist as well, because I have managed to, I would go persuade some people about dealing with research method just because of a pragmatist approach, because their supervisors would want that, okay? And they would go, but the examiner would want that. So if we then go in our research method and talk about our research paradigm, my question has always been, why have we only touched on this in the method? If I've been busy with literature, because theory allows me to ask the question, and data allows me to answer the question. Literature gives me evidence in asking the question. My data would give me the evidence to answer the question. Why is it that we only start talking about research paradigms and research method? Are we really saying that, okay, knowledge, within knowledge, I am something, But with research method, now I have to justify that I'm a positivist. And then, are we truly understanding what a positivist is? Because if we go, the theory behind it is epistemology, what is knowledge? Then are we clear? Are we certain that as business scientists, people dealing with people, are we really certain that we're not biased by our past experience? And I would say my PhD students, and we have, like many of us at business schools, PhD students who have years of experience. Are they truly unbiased? Would we not say that their previous experience and their previous perceptions that they had would influence them in any way, which means that typically then can't really be a positivist now, can they? And if we then add on this reality that am I sure that this thing that I'm investigating is this thing, or have I actually thought about the reality of it? Because then we would go to the opposite side and go, yeah, but then actually we're all interpretists. And then people would go, no, we're not. We cannot be because we count. And I go, boy, my head hurts. And in that, I then go, oh, maybe it's an old school way of looking at it. Maybe the way that we've been trained and the way that people have said to us, this is how you should think. Because dealing with my German colleagues, they go, I've never heard of it. They have a completely different way of looking at it. And then they do differentiate, but they have different philosophers within their realm than what we have. And I then go, oh, so we pick up this debate a lot in the countries that would speak English. This is where we pick this up a lot. Whereas some of the other countries that do not fall back on mother tongue English would typically not have this debate. They have other debates. So if you would allow me to show you this a bunch of articles. I've literally searched 2,000 articles. Now, this one I liked because I want to show you what it says. It says that we should, to better understand research methodology, researchers need an understanding of research paradigms. So we need this understanding of paradigms. Paradigms can be described in a different way of viewing the world, and often the foundation of which research is undertaken. They consist of a set of assumptions about what is reality, how knowledge is created, and what is valuable to learn. It is important that researchers are clear about their own beliefs and assumptions. And I go, have we really checked that box? Are we truly clear on what our beliefs and assumptions are? I'm not too sure. I'm not really convinced. In understanding paradigms and their impact upon the research process, researchers will be better positioned to understand the nature of research questions, why particular methodologies are used to answer those questions, and how data are collected, analyzed, and interpreted. Consequently, this assists research in developing clear understanding so that they can critique. Now, have a look here. If we say it's important for us to be clear about our own beliefs, I've had many, many people just backtrack on their own beliefs based on maybe a different theory that someone else has brought. Okay, so knowledge could then be second guessed. This part that we go, well, in understanding it, I will be better positioned to understand the nature of research questions and particular methodologies used. And my favorite one is, if I know the research paradigms, which many of us didn't, I would be able to critique research and show how results can be translated. And I would argue that I have read many, many reviews, and I've been privileged to work with some good researchers in my life. And some of them had even been editors. I have a colleague now that is an editor of a top journal. I literally asked him, so tell me, what is your belief? And what he went, I'm an economist. I have no idea what you're talking about. He goes, they would probably say we're positivists. I don't believe in that. So we're saying that for you to be a good researcher, for you to be able to judge good research and to undertake good research, you should understand the research paradigms. And I go, no, I don't buy it. I don't think it's a necessity. Okay, so I would like to quote you. This was my saving grace, I think about 10 years ago when I decided to stop struggling with this. and I thought I'll share it with you, the rhetoric of positivism versus interpretivism. This was, he was an editor at the time of a top journal. He said, for my part, however, I no longer want to be labeled as a positivist researcher or an interpretivist researcher. It is time for us to move beyond labels and to see the underlying unity, what we are trying to achieve via our research methods. The commonalities, in my view, are compelling and paramount. The differences should not divide us. The challenge for us is to rethink and develop a new rhetoric so we can come to a deeper understanding of the meta-theoretical assumptions that underlie our research. In my experience, I have found that dealing with research paradigms and forcing students, and I'm not thinking of PhD students now, I know that many top researchers and top supervisors have gotten this down to the T. But we should keep in mind that within our country, we don't have this massive throughput rate on PhDs. We do not deliver many PhDs. And then we make them go study a philosophy that they weren't really educated to do in the first place. And when I found this guy, he said this in 2004, when I found this article, I thought, oh, okay, I'm going to be this bloke. And why I like this is it would mean we all have methods that we prefer or that we're good at or we're better at. But the people I have found, my colleagues who are staunch believers in the research paradigms and these frameworks that they have, they go, no, Charlene, sorry, I can't supervise this student because I'm not a positivist. And I've not been able to deal with that. It keeps people out instead of including people, and it does not allow necessarily for us to, specifically in the business schools that we are, having to deal with and supervise different types of studies. It is so that some of us are better in one and in the other, but I would suggest that instead of going, yeah, but I'm a positivist, go, okay, maybe let's try, and I know this is what the pragmatists would say, let's try that and think about, if we start with a literature discussion, if we start with a plain real world question that we often then translate into a scientific world, a knowledge world question, what are the assumptions that we deal with? Because most of the PhDs that I have worked with, even top supervisors that I've worked with, have already preconceived ideas in their head. And that's why often a lot of these debates we do find in natural sciences, and specifically in the medical field. I've stumbled up many research papers on that. Okay, so having said that, let's look at the research paradigms and PhD candidates. So let's just share another PhD comic strip with you. The PhD is a demanding qualification that requires students to demonstrate expert knowledge and a variety of skills and attributes, such as creativity and analytical ability. So if we then go, I know what, so if I can put it in comic terms, that a marriage versus a PhD, I do like the final one that says, until death do you part. And then with the marriage, they say, if you're lucky, and then PhD, they say, if you're lazy. So having said that, if we are trying to help supervisors and we're trying to help PhDs finishing up with what they're busy, my question remains, why are we only dealing with research paradigms in the methods chapter? Should it not be something that we then address right from the start? Because the way that we look at literature, the way that we would argue literature, the way in which we would formulate, build up to our research question would be influenced by the paradigm that you have. And then if we go, yeah, but you are positivist, are we really clear on what that is? Because I would argue within business research, we would typically always want to have answers, but it's not possible for us as humans, people, to really go, yeah, I'm completely impartial, I'm completely unbiased, I'm objective. How will we show that? And we do address validity and reliability, that's error in our methods, but then we don't assume that we're completely unbiased. We try and show it, but we know we're biased. And it's in knowing that we're biased that we are able to have better arguments and unpack our methods and how we will get data, I think, more scientifically than acting like we know what we don't. So in talking to PhD students, and I'm not even talking about paradigms. Sorry, I'm trying to watch the questions. And I'm trying to focus. So sorry that I'm getting distracted with the questions.
I don't know if you want to, because some of the questions are directly related to this. So I don't know if you want me to raise, perhaps to engage. I know you said you wanted to do the questions at the end. But,
Marla, I'm almost done. Sorry, okay, Marla, I'm really almost done. Okay.
Perfect.
So remember, from my understanding is we're trying to help one another, and also we're trying to help our PhDs. So when I start, remember, we don't talk research method with our research philosophy with our students. We typically start with problem statement. And in talking about problem statement, my biggest challenge has been to try and get students to understand that we live in different worlds, and that the world that they live in is a different world when you move into the scientific world, so the knowledge world. So if we go, and this is just a slide that I typically share with my students, if we go, well, if everything we know, it's either my own world, the world we live in, or the scientific world. To get students to move from everything they know, so not being a blogger, because often in their scientific writing, they write like a blogger, or they write like someone with writing for popular press, and they would go, the small and medium-sized enterprises are the heart of the South African economy. And it's beating steadfast to allow us to create jobs. I go, I don't really know where South Africa's heartbeat is sitting, and the way that you're writing with an agenda instead of just being a scientist about it. So this shift that I have to get them to move from airport literature, grey literature, as opposed to what we would call true knowledge, so everything that's been peer reviewed, has been a big debate. And let's be honest, many of those top journals, all the articles, they do not address research paradigms. So if we're trying to move our students from an anecdotal world into a scientific world by merely getting them to work with scientific literature, why are we forcing them to do research paradigms? They've not had philosophy. And I was fortunate enough to work with our previous director was a philosopher. And he was probably the biggest reason why I decided not to participate in the debate. Because if you listen to a true philosopher talk about research methodology and about how do we know what knowledge is, how do we argue reality, if you deal with that, then you go, yeah, maybe the way that we go about it might be too superficial, and maybe we should think about validity and reliability in the way that we've been doing it without research paradigms, without going, well, I'm a positivist and therefore these are me acknowledging the limitations or whatnot it might be. So I don't know what your lived experience is, but this is probably my greatest challenge in dealing with students on PhD level, is to get them to respect, appreciate, and participate in scientific discourse. In doing that, I do find, now that I understand, well, since I've been read up on what the different philosophies are, that one student within 6 months can literally have all research paradigms and have all frameworks trying to figure out what it is they're trying to argue. And by pinning down and going, well, obviously you're a positivist, is really restricting the student, because now they go, okay, so I'm a positivist, hence I have to do a quantitative study, because that's what the narrative has been, as opposed to become a true master of the field. So the discipline, the topic that you're in, and have the authoritative sources to support that, as opposed to, I'm not going to go, this is a positivistic approach. And I had a couple of examples and I thought, no, I won't do that to the students who wrote it. in the first instance. So have a quick look here. This is just a research process. I know as many textbooks, as many processes. And with that, I often say to students, well, people are fixated on getting data, using data. So the method part, so we get data and then we use data. But in the true research process, the first step is always problem definition. So finding the research question, finding evidence for the research question in literature. And because specifically, and I heard Sean say that, and I absolutely agree, with MBA students, they don't have a deep knowledge about the literatures yet. MCOM students, I also find, have a better understanding and better knowledge about the specific literature that they have. But if we then agree that typically students will start in business research, students will start with the literature, then already they might have a couple of research paradigms when they start. If we look at the true philosophy about what those paradigms truly mean and how they apply to our everyday lives. Okay, because the truth is, truthfully, because they are students with experience, they cannot separate themselves from the situation. But then they will go, so they're not positivists, but they're doing a quantitative study. So now everyone's confused. If we then agree, guys, you know what, we should include research paradigms. And I know many of you do. And myself as a supervisor, I don't. I've not had, by the grace, I've not had an external examiner that turned around and said to me, Charlene, your student needs to put in something about research paradigms. I have colleagues who insist on having the research paradigms in the research methods chapter. And of course, often it comes back because people are knowledgeable about that. I've had students say to me, but my supervisor insists, and it's for those students that I then try and help in defining and defending what they would do. But my own modest opinion remains that we're doing something because we were told to do it sometime and some point in place, but which makes no real sense to me, because if we agree that the research process starts with problem definition, we should already then address our own bias, okay, our own view of what knowledge is, our own view of what reality is, and how we go about investigating that. Because it's not like the literature that we then read as scholars just fall down onto us. We decide what we read, how we read. So in that information quest we do, we already have a paradigm. It's not something that happens when you start with research method. And the mere fact that this is how we've been dealing with this, I've always struggled with it. And I have asked, and I remember when I was a PhD, I did ask my supervisor, can I not put it in the first chapter? Because it feels like everything that I'm doing following on would be based on this thing that you just explained to me. And I remember him saying to me, no, okay, we'll put it in method. That's where it belongs, because we've done all the rest, and then methods about getting the data. Okay, and I have also, because I don't believe in you're the one or the other, and I know I had a colleague who studied at Cambridge, and when she came back, she said to me, Charlene, you're one or the other, you can't be both. I do, well, this was 20 years ago. I do think it's an old school way of looking at it, because anyone who has worked with data would know that with data, depending on how you approach it and what the purpose of it is, data could actually be on a continuum. It's not dichotomous. For example, qualitative data would be 1 and quantitative data would be 0. I would argue it's in a continuum, because all quant can become qual and all qual can become quant. And because of that, if we view data differently, then maybe we will start looking at the paradigms differently. But my modest opinion. So if we then go back to the research onion, I did enjoy the other day when one of my students said to me, Charlene, I've never heard of the research onion. I heard someone talk about when we spoke about the research onion, she said, I've never heard about it. And she was in my undergrad class and in my postgrad class. I said, yes, you would not have heard about the research onion from me, because I don't believe in the onion. Okay, I know about it, but because of my struggle with the fact that we are not philosophers, and I do respect philosophers, because we're not philosophers, we are business scientists trying to answer questions. I would say, I think it's time that we peel the onion. Okay, I loved what Helena did yesterday, and I used hers in my, because that's typically in the research onion. If we just peel it, just peel out off the outside of it, then we left with the basics of getting data and using data. So defending research method in a way that we as scientists would expect. So making it credible and trustworthy, or reliable and valid. And I would argue not only the data, but also the literature. It's not a two separate thing. So having said that, thank you for your time. I'm happy to take any comments or uproar, me throwing around, okay, research paradigm.
You've definitely engaged a lot of chat and discussion. So we do have multiple questions that need to be facilitated. So the first, I think that one of the big areas is around the clear understanding of, Prof Anderson has said here, I think the idea of a clear understanding of belief and assumption is critical for both the student and supervisor. So just as a comment, Prof Klop has also put some comments around, for those of you who saw earlier on, around reading a specific book that may work. And somebody asked, Ashraf asked if you could unpack the difference between the analytical framework and integrative and conceptual, but Prof Klop did comment on that as well. So Obi's question is, are research paradigms and research philosophies the same thing? I see different articles using these terms interchangeably.
Sorry, I am trying to find the question, Marla, so I wasn't listening. Could you just repeat the question?
Are research paradigms and research philosophies the same thing? I see different articles using these terms interchangeably. It's OB at 3:31 p.m., but I'll follow the questions for you.
Okay, thank you. So the literature is quite confusing between the research philosophies and research paradigms. I think what would help you is to go back to the philosophy on, what is research philosophy. And research philosophy, they do link onto epistemology, and mostly and sometimes on ontology. So we would go, research methodology would be epistemology, and that would be what is knowledge. And this is now where this debate about beliefs and values come in, because values would be the ethics debate in philosophy, as opposed to, but my belief is based on my knowledge is based on my belief, but what is it that I actually believe, and how would I know that I have knowledge? If am I going on my prior experience, or am I going on my senses? And then I don't really know if I have knowledge at all. So my shortcut has always been to go back to the philosophy, and I've been trying, because it's really hard, reading the research philosophy journals to understand what they do, because typically they won't necessarily use empirical evidence like we do to prove their case. They would just build an argument. So they're brilliant at that, because they also incorporate this logic. So in my experience, I have just fallen back on research philosophies, and it's because of that I have wondered whether we should be talking about stuff that we do not have masters in. I'm a trained academic, which means that I did a third-year module, which I did an honors in, which I did a master's in, which I did a PhD in. So I have great respect for specialization and knowing what I don't know. And because I have not studied philosophy, since I've encountered this, I've just taken it up as undergrad. But I do not have a master's in philosophy, and because I don't have a master's in philosophy, I don't think I should be talking about it at PhD level, because this is how we were trained. But it's because I went back to the research philosophies that I respectfully just keep my mouth shut, specifically around the philosophers. I do think it might be different for other disciplines, but in business, this is how it could play out. And it's just the nature of our science, if that helps.
Thanks, Prof Charlene. So I see Ben's got his hand up. I was just going to say, those be the post questions. I think it'll be quicker if you frame your own questions. So Prof Anderson, yours was actually the next one coming up. So I don't know if you want to comment on this or ask your question as well. Thanks, Ben.
So I'll be curious, thanks Charlene. I'll be curious to know whether you can appreciate that we may have different views of what business is about.
Yes.
So for me,
yes.
So if business is a social construct, then most probably philosophy is critical.
Yes. If only they taught us this undergrad, ne? This has been my greatest sadness that we didn't have it.
So if we engage with our students, particularly at the PhD level, I sense some indeed appreciate it as a social science or construct, and others do not appreciate it as a social construct.
Yes.
Now, that poses an interesting challenge to the supervisor, because if you are more aligned to the scientist notion versus the philosophical notion, those will be two different pathways.
Yes.
And
Definitely.
I would be interested to know, how the colleagues would think around this. Do we gauge that at the start? Because as much as we want to think in a transdisciplinary context, which may allow for the scientist and the philosopher to become involved in a dance.
Yeah.
I'm wondering to what extent are we engaging such a dance?
I do think, thank you for that. I absolutely agree. I do find when I deal with the economists and the way that they go, and they go, but we're actually the mother subject. I go, They don't really engage, like you just said, with the philosophers. I often go, well, you guys have a hammer, and you think you're being unbiased, but you're not. You're actually very biased.
Yeah, but what I'm fascinated by at times, so somebody would be very much the scientist. I want to do quantitative work. I want to know the facts. Let's not be fluffy around it. But starting with the ontological and epistemological grounding, as well as the axiological position of the individual and how they look at the relations to reality through phenomenological engagement, you find them in total comfort in grounding themselves almost as a social construct.
Yes.
But yet when they want to touch the study,
they go, I'm positivist.
And you almost get that paradox and that duality sometimes. And you can see how they struggle, because as much as they want to be the quant scientist, there's just no light on in that regard.
And that inability then to deal with their bias is then also what becomes a big challenge. And then we can now go on, then if you pick it up in their conclusions chapter, when they start confusing deductive and inductive reasoning. So thank you for that.
Sorry, I don't know why my screen was jammed for a moment. Elsie, I see you've raised quite a lot of very important and interesting points. If you want to perhaps comment and discuss with Prof Charlene, summarize those various points. You did ask a specific question as well. So I don't know if you want to raise that now.
Oh, sorry, Marla. Are you talking to me or someone who posed a question?
No, it was someone who posed a question.
Okay, let me just focus on the very last one, which says that, Charlene, are you implying that paradigms are automatically inherent in every researcher and therefore they need not be stated in the document?
Okay, good question. I would say that because we're not clear on our paradigms, what we're doing is we're ticking a box without necessarily understanding what it is that we're doing. I think many of us have various paradigms because we have, specifically at business schools, we don't have the luxury of only dealing with one specific discipline. And because we're dealing with multiple at the same time. I would argue we might have multiple paradigms without knowing it, but we've gotten used to this way of, well, because I'm going to run time series regression analysis, I'm going to be a positivist, when everything that Benjamin just said to us then contradicts all this notions that I might have of, no, but I'm a complete scientist. When one would ask, is it really possible to make those claims about yourself if you've not truly mastered the theory, the philosophy behind it? And that's the question I'm asking. And then if people can unanimously or within their conviction, because they're knowledgeable, answer yes, then by all means, write your pages of research paradigm. But I am questioning our ability as business scientists, whether we're being truthful in doing so. But I leave it to the audience to deal with. It's not for me to say. I just go, well, after the many, many, many research proposals I have read, I am not convinced that we truly, as a group, know what we're talking about. Maybe I'm projecting.
You want to comment?
So Marla, I'm listening to the debate and I'm loving it. And I do like the stance that the problem determines whether we need to articulate the paradigms in different ways. But I've become aware as well that I needed to give myself permission to change my beliefs, epistemology and ontology over the years. And that I think we sometimes have this unrealistic expectation that if you started in your 20s in a certain paradigm, that you will remain there for the whole of your life. And I'm one of the people who's changed disciplines and specializations, but I've realized most recently in the last 5 to 10 years that I've also shifted into a more nuanced space around paradigms and philosophy. And I love let's go back to what philosophy is really about. What are we trying to do? What does the paradigm actually shape? Because I think if you're going to continue to research, there needs to be growth in this area as well.
Thanks for that, Heather. I agree with you. And I have found that in some, literally with one student, one conversation, when they jump to one construct, I find myself thinking one thing, and then dealing with another construct, I find myself thinking another thing, and I would go, I just jumped within paradigms just in one discussion. So I think, unfortunately, the more we learn about something, the more we know something, the harder it becomes to actually deal with it, because of the complexity of, I would say, knowledge creation.
But Charlene, I was also trained that if you're going to criticize literature, you must do so from within the paradigm it was written. And sometimes the paradigm is wrong, and sometimes how they've used the paradigm is wrong. And when you supervise students who come to you with different paradigms, that intellectual flexibility or the ability to understand the differences is something I think we probably all still need development in. Yes,
and I would go, it changed my life when 8 years ago, our director just did a brief session on, well, this is research philosophy, because we asked him, please talk to us about this, because we had this notion that I don't think we were properly trained. And I do love what you're saying about what the paradigm that was used is wrong, and somehow it's been cast in stone, and this is now the way that we should think about it. And I am happy that we can talk about it and go, no, well, maybe not. We're not saying just forget all of it, but just it's nice to have a discussion about it and be able to say, maybe we should just talk about this again.
I did see a hand up, but it does seem to have gone down. Ben, I see, and Alan.
Yeah, it's Alan Pillay first.
Yes, Alan. So Alan, then Ben, and then Augustine. We're close to a break. So what I will do is, if those three can speak, and then we'll take a break after that, and we'll have questions again a bit later on. Alan?
Thank you, Marla. Charlene, I just want to know, why is it that in interpretive research, the instrument looks the same as a phenomenological research instrument, Yet the positivist research instruments are true to the paradigm. Like you don't see a lived experience if it's a phenomenological research instrument. And also there's no evidence if it's an interpretivist research instrument that there's co-construction of knowledge possible through it. Both look the same.
Thank you for that, Alan. You see, but where I struggle is, I remember my first training in qualitative data gathering. There was a professor there sitting, and he was a professor of Greek. And he then threw this curveball to all the scientists sitting there going, how can you make any claims when you're dealing with language? And Alan, well, we know there's in philosophy, there's this big language debates. And then if we go, but this instrument we're using for interpretivist opposed to the positivist, and this is something that we all forget, is that there's a language component there. And I started reading the pieces written on the philosophy of languages, and I just gave up. It was just too hard for me. It's probably because language does not come natural for me. So in that, I would counter argue and go, you're forgetting about this language issue, because language just, I would go unbiased, bias everything. And then we go, but now we go, but our instrument is actually okay when we've not considered the use of language. And I have found that people think that they're similar in speaking English, but they're not. And just by going, well, the way that we interpret English as second language, specifically if we go up north, I do find that some of my colleagues who've not mother tongue English, but learned it as the second language, really struggle with whatever measurement instrument or thing we give to them because of our own understanding of language. And that's not even something that we've discussed today. So, Alan, thank you for that.
Thank you, Charlene.
Benjamin?
Okay, just a comment on the latter response. I find it, I'm curious what you mean by saying if you refer to the scientist. Because I almost sense you're referring to the natural scientist.
No, I sat with my German colleagues. We designed a choice-based experiment, or the fractional experiment. And I was fascinated in how they were framing questions. And they thought they were doing right by English language, and the bias that came in just with the language.
Yeah. So if I say, I don't know who's the philosopher, but I do know who's the human scientist.
Yeah.
Just a comment.
Oh, are you the philosopher, the human? Yeah, and I would go, it's not the same person.
You see, that's the point. Okay.
Yeah,
what I wanted to say is on the debate between you and Heather. Now, as a psychologist, I am a bit curious in people fluctuating in terms of their ontological grounding and epistemological perspectives, and particularly the axiological grounding. Because if we say that can change, well, I can say yes to that, because I've seen people who are hard-staunched, let's say, Marxists, would suddenly become the most profound Democrat and capitalist if the salary is big enough. So they have changed, indeed. But have they become? No. At their core, they're still the Marxist. So I try to ensure that I think it's our role as a supervisor to get to the ontological grounding and epistemological perspective and even the phenomenological engagement and the axiology of that individual long before I actually try to understand what is the problem. I always say to them, I don't want to hear about your problem. I want to first understand, who am I dealing with here? What construction of brain energy and mind energy am I going to work with that I need to take cognizance of? And then to keep them true to that perspective which they foregrounded.
Benjamin, it's interesting that you say that the University of Groningen, they have a admissions test that they use that addresses that specifically to aid both the supervisor and the student, just to link on to what you're saying. And it's a psychological test they use. So that's exactly what they do. They don't do it for research paradigms though, but for exactly that reason, understanding the person that they want to deal with. Augustine, and then Marla, I think I'm going over time now.
Yeah, no problem. We'll do Augustine, and then when we come back from the break, the Q&A session a bit later on, there are some more questions. And then if you don't mind, Charlene fielding them then.
Thank you. Yes, it's just a comment that I'm making, talking from my experience. I used to study research methodology as a subject in my master's level course, which was an international master's degree. And during that time, it was about 20 years ago, there was no mentioning of paradigms in the text. So there was no mentioning in paradigms. What the result is, I was not in the know about paradigms. About 20 odd years later, I taught the research methodology at our education institution, and I encountered the paradigms. I encountered the paradigms which relate to some aspect of the research methodology course, amongst others, the positivist phenomenological approach, paradigms, phenomenological paradigms, positivist paradigms. But very interesting for me was that they also had a feminist paradigm in the text.
Yeah,
was a feminist paradigm. And I thought, as I was reading through the text, I realized, okay, perhaps on the next page, there will be a male chauvinist paradigm. But the male chauvinist paradigm were not there. And so this is the thing then that in my mind's eye, I realized that sometimes things exist that we are in the know, and sometimes things exist that we are not in the know. And because things exist that we are not in the know, I think it relates to the statement that the presenter made about everything we know and the things that we think we know, and we must also add the things that we do not know, but it existed for a long time. So there is some sort of a misalignment there with what we know and things that existed for a long time that we do not know. And so for me, the issue of paradigm then becomes an issue of whether you include the paradigm in your research or whether you do not include the paradigm in your research. By default, you do find yourself in a paradigm. And that paradigm is grounded in your own beliefs and assumptions, which is stated by Weaver and Olson. And that paradigm, whether intentionally or unintentionally, informs your worldview, your assumptions about your research, and your terminology and your interpretiveness of your research. And then it will also align with whether you can steer the research to a more positivist paradigm or to a more phenomenological paradigm. As you say, you can move a qualitative study or qualitative data, you can move it to a positivist, to a quantitative data through coding processes. And a mere quantitative study can be moved to a qualitative study. It can be reverse engineered to a qualitative study. So it's not like the two views perhaps is mutually exclusive, but perhaps the two views will be aligned by default with your beliefs and assumptions. And whether you make it explicit or implicit, intuitively, you can pick up on the beliefs, on the assumptions, whether it is, a Marxist, whether it is Karl Popper, whether it is a free market type of thinking, you can pick up on it. That is my input, Charlene. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that.
Thank you. I think some very rich and amazing conversation that you've sparked, certainly, Prof. So I will leave over the comments and questions for the next Q&A session. So please don't think they are lost. They are certainly there. And then also please just have a look. Prof Klopper, I see you added in a lot of very interesting points of discussion. Charlene, if you don't mind just addressing, someone asked just for a reference for the onion. They said, yeah, the peeled onion, but I assume it's the research onion. I like the peeled research onion. I like that name. I think we should rename it. So the research onion, just for some references, if you don't mind popping in the chat. So yeah, we're going to take...
Sorry, Marla, there's no reference for that. It was my opinion. And I said that. We should feel... But the rest, people can find this research all over. This is really peer reviewed. All of this is peer reviewed. All over.
Okay, so thank you. Thanks. But Charlene will share her slides as well, post the session through Anne. So we're going to just take a short break now before our next presenter, and then after that we will have a Q&A session. So if I could say to everyone, if we could be back at 4:15, it's now 4:10, to continue with the next session. Take a quick short tea or coffee break, and we'll see you in 5 minutes. Thank you very much. Embrace various partnerships, including through industry, both at a global as well as a continental and a local level. And I think it's really fantastic to see your various collaborations that span multiple continents, never mind countries, which is really something that I believe will grow research, and is certainly the reason, no doubt, that you're also an NRF-rated scholar and have won multiple distinguished awards. Prof Moloi joins us from Joburg Business School, or JBS as I know they like to be called. He's the director of academics there, and also holds the research chair in 4IR at JBS. So I think your CV speaks for itself, certainly, as well as the fact that you're extremely well published with 7 articles in various accredited journals. So we're indeed excited to hear your views on this part of the research journey and process. And we thank you for giving of yourself and your time today. So I introduce to you, ladies and gentlemen, Professor Moloi, to take us through our next session. Thanks, Prof.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the opportunity, Program Director. Appreciate it. Thank you for the invitation, SABSA and Wilson. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to share my experiences. Just typically, so what you're going to hear from me are the experiences that I've had examining a lot of PhDs and masters, qualifications in South Africa. So, but also just across the globe. Just if you can check for me, trying to move my slides up and down so they're not moving. Can you be able to see them on the other side?
I can just see your screen, your front screen. The cover page.
All right, let me try to reload. So just let me know. So I'll just put it on a slide mode as soon as I get a confirmation that it's moving.
Yes, I can see. I can see your cursor moving now, Prof. Yes, it has moved to the contents page.
All right, let me just put it on a slide show and see if it will kind of move. Yeah, it's moving now. Thank you so much. Experiences, as I've said, colleagues, so then examining the master's and doctoral studies, but also then the honors projects. And for each and every thesis or dissertation that I've examined, kind of take notes. But also at the same time, when they send my students out for examination and the examiners come back with the comments, I kind of take notes, and as a result, I've developed a rubric of some sort, which I hope to share with you. And I'm hoping that you know, it will be useful to you. You can maybe learn a thing or two from it. It has worked for me, and I hope it works for you. So I'll just give you the background. So when are the documents ready? The readiness. So what triggers the documents? What triggers the examination process? Who are the key individuals? The typical examiner for a master's and the typical examiner for a doctoral. So what do you get inside the exam package? So what do you get? What you know, what do I want to see inside the thesis or the dissertation? So then the decision metric, when I get the exam, so because they would send me an email, they send me the abstract, and I'll go through the abstract, and then they say, would you be available on this and that day to examine this? Then I say yes. But as soon as I get the document, then I apply my own decision metric to decide whether I want to go ahead or not, you know, examining the document. And then the examination itself, then I'll just take you through some questions that I kind of ask myself. So if I read an abstract, so I have a set of questions that I would ask myself, then I would answer. Then that helps me to kind of write the report at the end and arrive at the decision. So what I've also included is the post-examination matters just after the examination. So there's still some documentation that needs to be completed. Sometimes if there is substantive revision or even the minor revision, so there's still work that needs to be done. So then when I interact with the colleagues that are new, so in the masters and doctoral, so then they think once the decision is back or once the assessment is back from the assessors, then that's it. It's all good. So no, there's still some work that needs to be done post the examination. And then, so I'll just quickly conclude. So just a bit of a background. So on my own, I've supervised 10 PhDs, but I still carry a load of 12 doctorals. Then I still also carry a load of masters. I supervise mostly in accounting and auditing, corporate governance. So then, but just mostly that will be auditing, corporate governance. So then, and artificial intelligence. So then, and then the honors projects. So at UJ, typically you'd have a postgraduate diploma in accounting and an honors project, or an honors program. So if you want to get an honors program, you have to do the honors project. So then I get to supervise those honors projects and the MBAs as I got to the business school. So then, as I said, in terms of examinations, so locally and internationally, so I've examined 40 PhDs, and each PhD that I've examined and each PhD that I've sent out and I've gotten the response, there are things that I pick up and then I continue to build in the rubric that I have. So similarly, 60 master's dissertation projects and capstones. So I continue to build and continue to take out some of the things as one goes on and on. So then it starts with the kind of the readiness. So the doctoral candidate is ready, the supervisor is ready, and the co-supervisor says, we're ready, the thesis is ready. Then there's one document that kind of would, set the process, off. It's called the intention to submit. So then that intention to submit is signed by the student and both supervisors and the co-supervisor if there is a co-supervisor. But I mean, there has been cases where I've been asked to adjudicate where there has been difficulties between the supervisor and the student just decide to supervise, to submit without the supervisor signing on. Then generally, so then the intention to submit 3 to 6 months before the submission, there is a reason for that 3 to 6 months. So then there ought to be that appointment of the non-examining chair, who perhaps working with the supervisor would help with the identification of the supervisors. And then the CVs of the supervisors will go to the higher degrees committee. Then the higher degrees committee would decide whether the supervisors are competent enough based on the publications, the previous examinations, and their area, whether they are, they are appointable. But also then the reason why it would go to that higher degrees committee, so it's to avoid the situation where people keep on appointing the same examiners again and again and again and again. So in the business school setting, so we'd have the program managers at a faculty level, you'd have the senior faculty officers. They would kind of, once the examiners are identified, they would write to the examiner, check their availability to undertake the work. As soon as the examiner says, look, I'll be available at that particular time to undertake the work, then they make them aware that you only have 6 weeks to do the work and submit the report back. So then that intention to submit again, it triggers something to the faculty officers or senior faculty officers or program managers. So they begin to check the correctness of the title. So at a PhD level, so then the study would have been defended at the higher degrees committee, the proposal. So then the title is captured. The title also then goes on to the Senate Higher Degrees Committee, gets captured and gets approved. So then they go back to that title and check with the supervisor if the title is correct. But as I've said, generally 3 to 6 months, then you start triggering these processes. And then I just thought maybe I should put this figure here. So the key personnel, so then as I was discussing, so the candidate will have a role to play preparing the thesis or the dissertation, so under the supervision of his or her supervisors. Then in some institutions, so they will have the non-examining chairs, but in some institutions, the supervisor would kind of nominate the supervisors to the higher degrees committee. Then you then have the examiners. So then what most institutions are now introducing is the vivas or the oral defenses. So then, but the examination process would be in a way that the examiners would examine or they would assess, write their reports, submit. And then since COVID, a lot of work has kind of happened, the mainstream system. So then they would call the candidate back to come and defend or orally defend the work that they've done. So the same examiners that would have been appointed would be part of the panel that will run the defenses. When you look at the typical types of examiners that I've seen, so for the thesis, for the doctoral thesis, you'd have 3 examiners. So the national, what we call the national examiner, the other examiner that will be based, let's say maybe in an African continent, but sometimes it does happen that the examiner you'll have 2 just international examiners. So the practice that I've seen a lot is that you'll have the national examiner, then maybe another examiner who's in one of the African countries, and one that will be sitting beyond the borders of the African continent. So with regards to the dissertations, mini dissertations and the technical reports, so you'd have one examiner or one assessor that will be an internal assessor within the school, within the university, and then the external assessor, so outside the university. So then they would do that. And interestingly, so then because in your mini dissertation or technical report, you need to have the marks. So the universities will kind of differ. So the mark that you get from the internal examiner and the external examiner gets to be averaged. Then the average becomes the mark, but just it then depends also. So if that if the mark is just wide, kind of open, sometimes they use 10%, sometimes 15%. Then if it's just the difference between the 2 assessors is more than 10%, then the higher degrees policy will kind of give guidance as to what should happen. But if it's within 10%, it would normally get to be averaged, and the average mark gets to be the mark that you know, is kind of disclosed. So the PhDs, so then, as you know, so I think I have a bit of a mini framework that shows, so then approved, successful without any changes, successful, so with the minimum changes, substantive changes, or total reject. So that's how they get to be assessed. So if you get to this slide, so then inside the examination package, so then inside the examination package, you typically get your letter of appointment that tells you that you've been appointed, you know, to be the assessor for this, you know, this candidate. Then you'll get also the examination form, so where you have to indicate, you know, the choice after you've, of course, studied the thesis, the rubric. So each university, this is what I've realized, each university would kind of say, okay, focus on this, focus on that. Particularly so when it comes to projects. So then most universities would always emphasize that this is not a dissertation, this is not a thesis, this is a master's project, this is a capstone project. And then also what you'd find is the form for honorarium. So they don't necessarily pay assessors or examiners any salaries. They pay a little bit of money called the honorarium. So then got to complete it. So then I've struggled a lot with the honorariums, particularly when it comes to the international colleagues. They would sometimes not fill those forms, and I think recently they also have to fill the SARS forms. They wouldn't fill those forms, and they keep on asking, so I examined for this university on this and that date, I haven't been paid, and you have to go back and check what was the issue. Then the honorarium form was kind of not completed. So those would be your typical documents that will kind of find inside inside the thesis, but you know, as part of the package of the thesis. But the thesis itself now, so this is now me. So when I get the thesis, so the first thing that I do when I get the thesis, so then I want to see the declaration that I kind of declare that this is my own work, and every work that has been used or sourced somewhere has been cited correctly. So in text and also in the list of references. So I look for that statement. So if that statement is not there, so I send it back to the non-examining chair to say, look, the candidate hasn't declared that this is their own work. I think so. Then what I see, so one thesis that I examined just recently from Kenya, there is that declaration. So then in addition to that, they are adding something that so to say, this is my own work, but also I've used the ChatGPT. So then for this and that particular portion and other forms of artificial intelligence or AI. So I'll tell you why. So if you run some of these things, suppose, so just want to tell you, if you run through some of these things on Turnitin, it will show you the TII, the Turnitin score. Then it will also show you the AI score if they don't do that declaration. So then I would pick that up anyway. So then, and then the Turnitin report, I would page and go to the back and see if the Turnitin report is kind of enclosed, and then the ethical clearance certificate. So if I don't find these things, then I would write back to the non-examining chair and then ask that even though I can run my own Turnitin, so I just ask that if I can be provided with the ethical clearance certificate, particularly if the study would have used the primary data or secondary data. So then, or if the candidate was exempted, so then I'd need to see the letter of exemption. But the declaration for me is important. When I get that thesis, I look at these three things. And these three things guide the decision-making process, whether I continue examining that thesis or dissertation or kind of not. So then, which leads me to this decision-making process. So does the thesis contain any of those, those three things that I've mentioned? Yes, I proceed. I examine. No, so I request the missing documents from the non-examining chair. On receipt of the documents, I kind of proceed. But of course, there are other things that they would put at the back there. So then, like the letter, so from the language editor to say the thesis was, or the dissertation was language edited. So then so many things, and then just a list of all the other appendices. So in some cases, so in the thesis, particularly in universities that require that before the thesis is awarded, there ought to be some publication that comes out of it. So then they would then, enclose the proof of the article acceptance, etc., etc. But I kind of just look for these three documents, the three things: the declaration, the candidate's own declaration, so and the signature, then the Turnitin report. So right now, the Turnitin since April, it comes with the AI score and then the ethical clearance certificate. So that helps me to answer the questions, so that I will be showing you. It helps me to answer those questions in my rubric. So then, as I said, I use a rubric of some sort, and this rubric, I've developed it over time. I continue to add on it as I examine these documents. So I would pick up some of the things, or as my students get examined, so I pick up a lot of things, then I'll go back and look at the rubric and say, perhaps this portion of the rubric would need to be changed or enhanced, etc., etc. So then I use the rubric. Then if you look at the first part of the indicator in my rubric, the first thing that you'd see, of course, in the thesis is the table of contents and all these things. Then it's the abstract. So these are sets of questions that I would kind of ask myself: is it an accurate reflection, written in a concise manner? So then I would then give an answer. So these things help me to write the final report. So, but also then, as a supervisor, as I supervise my own students, so I use the same rubric. So then, okay, I'll wear the cap of being a supervisor. Then when the thesis is complete and just before it goes to the language editor, so I'll take off that cap. Then I start wearing the cap of the assessor, and I start going through these questions. Does it warrant academic research? So then, what warrants the academic research? So is there a problem? Is the problem sound? Is it grounded on literature, etc., etc.? Can it be justified within the parameters of the discipline? So if it has to do with auditing and accounting, can I justify it within the parameters of accounting and the discipline? Is the topic of inquiry relevant? Has it been contextualized? So these are questions that I kind of start asking. Then I look at the title, even though there is very little that you can do anyway with the title, but I still ask myself these questions, particularly for my own students before they go to examination. So does the title accurately describe or indicate the research done? So then if I was examining this, would I suggest an alternative, or an alternate title? So you'll see, as I ask these questions, I kind of answer them so that I can give you some guidance. So say if the candidate had written the title, that this is the abstract in that format, when we come to that decision metric, or where you have to choose accept, without, etc., etc., then these are all things that play a role in kind of that decision. So if we go to the introduction and the background, so these are questions that I would kind of put there. So the introduction, as they put it there, does it clarify the broad theme and the background? So does the introduction provide sufficient motivation for, this topic? Do I see the practical importance? So, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm asking these questions. So then all these things, they kind of allow me to make it, to answer these questions towards, the rubric at the end to say, what do I think of the dissertation or the thesis in its totality? So the problem and the purpose. So then is the problem of academic, significance or practical significance. Could it lead to the creation of new knowledge? So then you begin to ask, those questions. Does the problem flow logically from the introduction and the background? So then is there that seamless flow? Ask this question, okay, yes, it's linked to the background. Now I don't find these links. So then the research objectives, hypotheses, and the propositions, the justifications, the key terms. So then you want to see the key terms defined at the beginning so that when you meet this term, meet the thesis or the dissertation, you actually know what it means. So then the session before me was talking about discussing the research design and the methodology. So then in that first chapter, so then at the high level, so do I get a brief description? So is it cross-reference to a detailed discussion of a methodology chapter? So are research objectives clear and precise, and are they arranged in a logical order? So quite difficult to kind of determine. So, but if you were to look at these objectives in totality, so do they kind of help us to solve this problem? So then is the hypothesis or proposition appropriate? So are you not, putting the hypothesis of things that are not emerging from literature? So then demarcation, so then we're looking at the scope. So is it sufficiently demarcated? Do we have the overview of the structure of the dissertation or the thesis? So like if you look at that chapter 1, can I begin to see what chapter 2 is going to deal with, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and so forth and so forth. So these are rubrics as you examine, so and they examine your students, that you kind of pick up. So then lit review, when I go to that lit review chapter, sometimes so you'd have a chapter that deals with the conceptual framework or theoretical framework. Then you also have a lit review chapter, sometimes 2 or 3 chapters that deals with the literature. So then in that lit review, is it relevant, the literature? So I think most of the things that we kind of what I'm picking up now, so is examiners saying, oh, okay, the citations that you've used are more than 10 years or more than 5 years. There are fewer citations that are new, et cetera, et cetera. So I just have to build that in here. So I think with my latest PhD that had gone out, it came back. So then some of the comments were in and around the years. So then to say 2015 may be too old, so look for 2017, et cetera, et cetera. So then may have to maybe build that up as part of this. So does the literature review clearly outline the theories? Does it include both the corresponding and the contradicting literature on the topic? So then read the ideas that are different from other ideas. So then I kind of look at those things. Then lit review, you'd see I spend a bit of time on the lit review. So then hence you see lots and lots of questions. So then is it properly synthesized? So then does the literature review present previous research technically correct? So I think so. Then what you're trying to do is that sometimes I've seen it with my own students. So they read this article this article had cited another article. So when you go to the original source, then you realize that, so this author actually, this is not what he argued, but because you just picked up from someone that had supposedly picked it up from someone else, so you make a mistake that particular person would have kind of made. So I just kind of check some of those things, go and read the abstract and the conclusion of, say, maybe one particular article for my students and figure out if they are correctly citing the article. But I spend a bit of time on both the lit review, so as I examine, but just generally for my own students, as well as the results, the analysis of results. So then the next section that I kind of, okay, this is just a continue, the conclusion of the lit review. So the next section that I then move to is that of the methodology, which has just been discussed. Then again, so then I have some questions. The chosen research design and method, has it been sufficiently described? So then the candidate, is the strategy of inquiry, research design, and methods appropriate, sufficiently justified, why you are moving or why you are using that methodology? So then ask all those questions and then just, look for the justification. Then the next section that I would kind of spend a bit of time on is that of the findings. Data is presented in a meaningful and practical manner. The findings are related, they relate to the questions and the objectives, the figures and table, if they are used. So I check also the table numbers and the figure numbers. I would tick. So then it has been properly, numbered. It has also been properly interpreted. So if you say it was the valid percent was 29%, so then the mean was this, it was 2. I would literally go and just try and figure out if you are interpreting the tables correctly. So I would spend a bit of time also on the findings and asking those particular questions. And then on the discussions, conclusions, and recommendations, again, so then I would ask the questions, are the main conclusions linked back to the literature to show how the findings corroborate, extend, so then with the existing literature? So did the candidate use some theoretical evidence from the literature and they integrated that in the argument? So then the conclusions, if they are drawn, do they relate logically to research questions, the issue at the hand, or the problem and the objective? So then all these things, as I collate and read, so then they help me to write my report. So in a sense, what I'm trying to say that as I kind of examine, so then I would kind of read maybe, so then chapter 1, and I would come back and write a mini report on chapter 1, chapter 2, write a mini report on chapter 2, and so on and so on. Then even on references, I'll have, as I assess, so then I'll have, a mini report on references. Oh, okay, then there was inconsistencies in the references, etc. Then you have the discussions, conclusions and recommendations. And again, so then the conclusions, are they flowing logically from the findings? So then again, so then I'd have to write, did the candidate includes the recommendation for practice as well as the recommendations for theory? So I ask myself all these questions again. So it's for the purposes of me arriving at the decision. So you'll see, as I was asking questions to this fictitious candidate that I've created here, so then I would put an answer. So like if you look at the last question, does the researcher offer a well-motivated and insightful suggestion for future research? So then for this fictitious candidate, I say he has offered the list. So then I write, then that assists me now to, okay, this would be the contribution. So the contribution, so again, I'll ask questions on the contributions. Think so then, okay, then also then the technical presentations, I'll be sharing the slides with you. So then technical presentations, so I'll also then just look at the sequencing, the tables, the graphs, as I've said, the layout. So I would even check the fonts. So then the font, you know, the size of the font, the spacing in between. So then even for all the chapters, so then the titles, are they in order? I would kind of check that. So then I would call that part and parcel of the technical presentation. So then, and again, so it's just a technical presentation. So then the appendices, the references, and kind of all those things. And I just wanted to rush to this part, which I always think it's important. So I would ask myself that question. So then to say, all right, is there any area that I'm kind of concerned about? In most cases, when they send the thesis, they would send a summary of the similarity, not the detailed report. And I put it through Turnitin for myself on my own playground, put through Turnitin, etc., etc. So then I'm just looking for the areas where there is a concentration of red. That kind of helps me to see if there are no areas that you know that one should be concerned about. And of course, then the granting of the ethical clearance, etc., etc. Then just also maybe looking at the similarity itself. So I know sometimes if you look at the similarity and you don't interpret it, you could kind of say, the similarity is very, very high. But each university will have its own similarity index or similarity number that is acceptable. So some would say 15%, 18%, 10%, etc., etc. So then various ones. But this, for me, so is important. I would run the Turnitin, then I would also then just go and make sure that there aren't areas of concentration, even for myself, for my own students. Because in the Turnitin itself, so some students are able to disable. They disable other things. Then Turnitin doesn't read, you know, other things that it should read. So I run the Turnitin report for my students, even if they've run it. Then I would analyze it and check the areas that I think I'll be concerned about. So I would run that. So as you run it these days, you run it, then it will kind of show you the AI score. So then, so when we asked Turnitin to explain to us, so then what did they consider? What is inside the algorithms, the AI score algorithms? So then the answer is it isn't clear, but at least as a guidance, so that I can be in a position to guide my own students. So I take into account that AI score. I think so if it goes to the higher side, like it's approaching 30, 40%, etc., I really get concerned. And then I want to look inside the report and see if the student hasn't asked ChatGPT to say what's the research methodology, what's the ontology, axiology, etc., etc. So then I'll definitely do that. So then this is the section that I was kind of talking to. So then I would write back that the similarity shows 15% similarity, and if there is the area that I'm concerned about, then I would just highlight that okay, so then it's pulling directly from this paper, maybe not properly paraphrased, etc., etc. So then that becomes important. So that's my rubric, colleagues. Those are rubric. That's the rubric that I use for my own students as we prepare for examination, but also when I examine, and it's just the work in progress. when I pick up new things, I come back to this rubric, and then I write I write the amendments. If I think there are amendments that needs to be communicated to the candidate, then I'll write back in my report to say this and that portion. So the supervisor and the candidate must attend to it and clear it up. So essentially, those are my rubrics, colleagues. Then you've seen this. So if that fictitious candidate that we were assessing, examining, so everything looked positive, I've written my report, then I'll come back and say, okay, so the things that I picked up were kind of minor. So then that would have been the X that I would kind of tick. So then if sometimes you have section B, the second round, if the thesis has been examined before, then it's coming back to see if the issues that you raised were addressed. Then you then have to say you accept or you kind of reject the changes that have been made. So I just want to talk quickly, so then it will just take me maybe 5 minutes, colleagues. So the post-examination, so then of course I've spoken about the oral defense. But within universities, so if you are in a public university, so then schools still have to define their own process. So then oral defense, how it should be conducted and who should chair it, etc., etc. Each faculty board has to approve its own oral defense processes. But in other schools, so then whatever comes back from the assessor is acceptable as the final results. There is no need for the oral defense. So then as you write the reports to the Senate or the faculty board, the supervisor must provide the proof of the manuscripts. If it is the requirement of the school that the manuscripts must be submitted before the graduation, so then you provide the proof of that. And other points that I just wanted to talk to, the documents post-examination. So it doesn't end with the assessment and the report that you get from the assessor. So then you take the examiner's reports, then a proof of manuscripts submitted, then you've cleaned up now the thesis in line with the requirements or in line with what the assessors said. So then you then have the schedule of revisions. So you're showing this assessor said this is how we've addressed it. Or we totally disagree with this assessor, he just did not get it. So then the student will show how they've addressed the thing, then the supervisor will confirm that, yes, indeed, this point now appears on the thesis or the dissertation. Then there is that supervisor's overview of the study. Oh, there is a long report that one has to write afterwards, then giving an overview of the study. What was the objective? What was the problem? What were the research questions? How was the study undertaken? So what were the findings? What are the implications of the study? So what are the conclusions? So the supervisor summarizes this and then also then quote from the assessors. The assessors indicated that they were happy, limited revisions or substantive revisions, etc., etc. By the way, this then goes back to those Senate Higher Degrees Committee. So when the thesis is about to be approved by the university, and they would say, oh, well, 3 reviewers or 3 assessors gave inputs, and none of them had major changes. The candidate has, implemented the views of the assessors. The candidate has submitted 2 manuscripts. Maybe one of them has already been published. Then they then ask the Senate to approve. Then the Senate will then approve the dissertation. That's when the letter will come from the registrar's office indicating that the qualification is completed. Only when the Senate Higher Degrees Committee, so which is a substructure of Senate, has approved, the thesis. Then the revised thesis to the library, there's just lots of forms that still need to go in. But just generally, so at a high level, so this is, you know, the process, the examination process. Then, so then I've spoken about this. There's your school's higher degrees committee, you write to the chair, you submit the documentation, the school passes that over to the Senate Higher Degrees Committee, which then confirms the qualification, then the letter of completion is then issued. But essentially, colleagues, then the examination process, you know, goes in this fashion. So I hope I stick to time. Thank you, Program Director. I'll just sit in the background. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Prof. You absolutely did. It is 5 o'clock currently. So both you and Prof. Gerber have certainly generated a lot of questions. So Prof. Moloi, we're just going to take a short break, and when we return, if you don't mind fielding some of the questions that have been brought up. A lot of people would like some of your insights and thoughts on various areas. So the time now is 17:01. If we could take about a 7-minute break, if we could be back at about 7 minutes at 17:02 now. If we could be back at about 9 minutes to 10 minutes past 5 o'clock.
Thank you so much, Mala. This is Shimika. Can you hear me?
Yes, sorry, it's just Anne just
Okay.
started the recording, so it just blocked for a second, but we can definitely
cool.
hear you.
Thank you so much. I just want to first start by thanking Prof. Moloi for the presentation. It was very insightful. Prof, I just wanted to ask you if the supervisors don't want to sign the intention to submit and the student is insisting to submit, how do we manage that kind of a situation?
Yeah, it actually happens a lot than, you know, what would like to admit. It does. The relationship, the supervisor-supervisee relationship is just a difficult relationship. So then you're trying to mold this person, then sometimes, you know, others would think, it's just pushing me too much, etc. But it does happen. So what we've done is that we now have what is called the supervisor student contract. So then where the supervisor would kind of undertake to do some of the things, the student knows what is it that is expected from the supervisor, and the supervisor knows what is it that is expected from the student. So we sign those supervisor student contract from the onset. So then you have that. But if the supervisor refuses to sign the intention to submit, depending on how now the higher degrees policy is written, so then where I worked before and where I'm working currently, the student can still kind of submit, go and make a representation to the dean, and then submit. Then the higher degrees committee and the non-examining chair would still have the responsibility, because at all times we must try to act in the best interest of the student, of course, reasonably so. So then go make a representation to the vice dean research or the dean, and the thesis does go out. Surprisingly, I'll tell you, so then in cases that I've seen, supervisor refuses to sign, the student gets a distinction. So it's just difficult, but sometimes the supervisor refuses to sign, the student fades. But in most cases that I've seen, the supervisor refuses to sign, the student still passes. The student gets a distinction. So these things do happen. But you've got to define the process in the higher degrees policy. So then, because you must try to expect all these types of things. Human beings by nature, so there will be conflict. So then in that relationship, there ought to be conflict. So I know, so then in most cases, when I ask my students to go and rewrite the methodology chapter, then they don't get happy with me. So when I tell them to go and reinterpret the results, they haven't done a good job, then they don't get happy with me. But you've got to try and expect some of these things, and you write your policy in a way that, you know, it has all these elements that allows the process to kind of move forward. Where I am right now, so the student can supervise, make a presentation to the vice dean research, and you know, and then they submit.
Thanks, Prof. Does that
Thank you,
answer
Prof.
your question?
Yes, it does, Mala. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Nisha, do you want to ask your question? I think a very interesting question here around examiners.
Thank you so much for that. I just wanted to know, you know, in your slides, you said one of the questions you ask is, does this research, is it warranted, you know? And as an examiner, I found sometimes maybe it's not. And it comes as a big surprise, because now the study is done and you are examining and you're like, but why was the study even conducted? So what would you do in a situation like that? Thank you.
Oh, that's a difficult question. So when I ask that question, so I'm interested in seeing the problem. Is there a problem? Is there a gap in knowledge so that this particular candidate is trying to fill? Yeah, so then it's a difficult question. Yeah, no, it's a difficult question. I do not know how to answer it. But yeah.
I do ask that. It is difficult because, like, in terms of my experience, I've then looked to see the rigor of the study. So maybe it wasn't warranted. Maybe it came as an interdisciplinary research, and, you know, maybe whatever the reasons were. But from my perspective, I would look at the rigor, the methodology, how they conducted it. But I just wanted your take, or if somebody else has an opinion. Thanks.
So Nisha, I think Prof Cooper has an opinion. I saw his hand go up. Prof Cooper, do you have an opinion on this?
Yes, thank you, Marla. And I think it's a great question, Nisha. I had two personal experience myself in the past. And the first one, I wrote back to the institution. I said, you know, I find it difficult to examine because this thing's got full of gaps. And they came back a few days later and say, no, they submitted the wrong version or attached the wrong version to me. Easy one to solve. So that's not the question you're asking. And the second instance, because if they approach you for examination, they give you the topic and a little bit of background, and I accepted that. And as I got that, I saw this study, to my mind, was seriously flawed in terms of methodology. And instead of doing a detailed report, I wrote back a short letter and I say, I found it problematic on one or two or three of the following reasons, which I disclosed. And I say, I'm happy to clarify that further. And I sent it back to the institution. Then the dean wrote back to me and he said, you know, they appreciate my comment. They will wait for the other reports and then they will make a decision. And at that point later, I got the message back. The other reports also failed that. So they asked the student to went back and do the revisions. Now, I think there's a developmental drive. So one should not be afraid to fail it. But if you fail it, you must say, what do you disagree with? I hate these reports where you just say outright, unacceptable, not that, that's not developmental of nature. So that would be my own position, and I only had the two experiences in the past.
Thanks, Prof Cooper. Obi, I see you've got a similar question to Nisha's question. So do you want to ask your question as well around the student passing?
No, I think
failing.
I think it was partly answered. I just wanted a Prof from his experiences to, if maybe he came across a student who maybe failed, and what are the things really that made him to make that decision that this dissertation at PhD level, it does not guarantee a pass. Thank you.
Prof Moloi, have you had experience where a doctoral student has failed yourself or someone you know of, and, you know, in terms of that?
So I think Prof Chopper has explained this nicely. So then my approach when I, you know, get the doctoral study is developmental. So I would rather elect the third point. So where I give the reasons for a substantive revision, then and ask that they resubmit back to me. So I've only had one case of a substantive revision. So in all the 40 PhDs that I've done. So my approach is developmental. So I would rather guide and say, I'm concerned about this, I'm concerned about that, etc., etc. But that's how I kind of approach it. I just think of someone that would have worked for 4 years, 3-4 years, laboring, toiling on the study. So if I pick up some weaknesses, let me point them out, let them get the opportunity to fix that, and then submit for re-examination. So that always works well.
Thanks, Prof. Alan, I saw you've got a question, and then there's also a question for Prof Gerber. So Alan, do you want to pose your question?
Sorry, thank you, Mola. I just want to know from Prof, if there is a major revision and the student responds to the major revision, does it have to go back to the external examiners, or is it handled by the high degrees research committee? Thank you, Mola.
Once it's a major revision, it's going back to examination. So there is no other way. So if it's a minor revision, so we say to the satisfaction of the supervisor, the higher degrees committee, the Senate higher degrees committee. But once it's a major revision, so there are flaws that were picked up, it must go back to the examiner so that the examiner can be satisfied that the flaws have been dealt with.
Thank you, Prof.
Thanks.
And then Farai, I think, I'm not sure if it's Farah or Farai, I'm not sure if I've pronounced it correctly. You've got a question to Prof Gerber, if I'm not mistaken. So I'm not sure if the question is at Prof, is it correct to insist that a candidate do a framework for a PhD? I heard some other professors say that a PhD without a framework was not sufficient. The topic was about performance management in local government.
Thank you, Mola. I'm not sure whether that was for me or for...
No, she said it was for you when I asked.
Okay. Well, it's always hard to talk about frameworks because what is it that we're referring to? Because within academia, we have various names for these things. I find it hard to answer because it's also discipline specific. I know in the finance fields, they do like their frameworks, but in a formula. So they would put a hypothesis and they will build a model. Whereas if you now go to the other side, industrial psychology, they like the theoretical frameworks where you build a structurally cogent model from. And then in between, the marketers like frameworks where they include the measurement scales. So I'm not quite sure what context or specific what discipline we're talking about. I often say to students, for PhD specifically, it really does not hurt anyone if you can portray the thing that you're trying to argue in some sort of diagram or framework. I think somewhere up here, HB did give a very nice explanation about academic frameworks.
For us, it's HR, Prof, theoretical framework.
Yes, they do like the conceptual models because typically they run the structurally cogent models of those. I even expect it of my master's students, not only my PhDs. It just becomes more complicated with PhD.
Thanks. I hope that answers the question. And then while you're on, Prof Gerber, there were quite a few questions in inbox about the peeled onion. My understanding is the research onion exists, as everyone says they know, but that the peeled onion is actually your own conceptualization, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, and it's similar to what Prof Barnard spoke about yesterday afternoon. It's literally the same. So that's the way I go about it. I did like her abbreviation that she used to get students to write it. But in my own students, I do peel the onion. But yes, you're right. It's just my way.
So, well, it seems to be a very popular, everyone's loving it. So it is credited to Prof Gerber. And I know a lot of you are asking about the presentations. So regarding the presentations, as we've said in the comments in the chat, those Anne will be getting the presentations from the various presenters over these 4 days, and then they will be made available on the SABSA website. I'm sorry, and if I'm not mistaken, they'll be sent to candidates participants who joined. Is that correct, Anne?
Hi, Marla. No, actually, we'll be putting it onto the website so people can access it. It will be open to anyone who wants to learn how to be better supervisors.
Okay, so there's your answer, everyone. It will be put up. And then Prof Moloi, there's also a question. Sibangani asked about how you can override a suppressed Turnitin report. So Sibangani, I don't know if you want to elaborate on your question, or if Prof Moloi will just answer it. Does anyone, Prof Moloi, sorry, you're on mute.
Oh, all right. So I thought he was going to ask it, and I
I also thought he was going to, but I think because I presented it. So Sibangani, you want to know how you override a suppressed Turnitin report? Is that correct? I'm not sure if Sibangani is still on, but it was the question that was asked, Prof Moloi.
Yeah. So he's asking how one overrides the Turnitin. Am I getting that correct, or what?
Yeah. So I'm not sure because it says the suppressed Turnitin report. So that's why I wanted him to clarify. I wasn't exactly sure.
Well, I'll just assume that he's asking how to override the Turnitin. So students do. So students are very creative. But also Turnitin asks you, so after you've loaded, you have the results. Turnitin then asks you, do you want to take off the references? Do you want to take off the student papers? Do you want, so you can click and remove all those things, then you'll see the similarity will kind of go down. So if you leave them, so in the report, then the similarity will be very, very high. So, but also then sometimes when students are loading their papers on Turnitin, so it remains there because licenses are a bit different. So my license as a lecturer is different to the license that the students are using. So they can only load one document. So then a day, overnight, let's say over 24 hours. So whereas I can load as many documents, and also I can have the playground where I load my stuff and then look at the similarity, etc., then and not actually leave it on Turnitin. So sometimes students will load the document. As they load it, they forget to remove it. When they load it again, so it returns something like 80% similarity. And everyone says, no, so this thing is plagiarized. But when you go to the report of the Turnitin, you try to read, you'll see something that will tell you, oh, student, University of Johannesburg, or student, University of Pretoria, or Da Vinci. Then you just have to go to that particular paper, you take it off, then it's off Turnitin. Then when the student loads again, will give you the correct Turnitin. I think so. That's the question that he's asking. Otherwise,
yes, I think so as well. And I do think it is important for us to probe the actual reports itself, because you can also at some universities, they do allow you to give a justification if the Turnitin report is problematic as well. Say, for example, you've done your own studies there and it is redoing it. And Sibangani has confirmed, Prof, that you are correct. That is what he was asking you.
All right.
So thank you. And then there's quite a lot of questions that have come up. So I'm just going to summarize it because it's multiple discussions around AI in general. So ChatGPT, etc., BARD, all the different ones. And there's two kind of streams of conversation that are happening. The one being that we've got to accept that this is the way of the world and how it's happening, and we need to engage it, and how are we going to be able to incorporate this within the academic journey, which I know many institutions are grappling with as well. The second part of it is connected very much to people asking what percentage is acceptable from ChatGPT or from one of the other AI platforms. And I know there's also a lot of debate about this. So back and forth, some people are of the opinion that one should look at how the student utilized it, in what way it was utilized, versus a carbon copy, and others say, you know, that there should be a hard and fast percentage. So Prof Moloi, I'm going to field this towards you because, you know, this was raised in your presentation, just your views, and then I'd love to open the floor for other people's views around, number one, ChatGPT, should institutions accept AI because this is the way of the world, it is the way we're moving. So accept it into the academic journey. And then the second part being, do you think that there's a specific percentage that could or should be acceptable? I know you did mention in your presentation 40%, but I'm just interested on your views, and a lot of people are asking that question and discussing that back and forth.
Yeah, so I think what we've done is that we've had a discussion, of course, at the Senate level, and then we have a working paper now. One thing that we've agreed on is simple. So then technology is moving, it is advancing. So then trying to work against it, so you're going to lose. That we all agree that there's no ways that you're going to win against technology. And therefore, so then the position that has been taken by our Senate is simple. So then we need to encourage our students to use these tools. But as they use these tools, so they use these tools as a base. So then baseline for kind of concepts. But you don't expect that they would kind of say, okay, then give me the background introduction, so methodology, etc., then cut, copy, and paste that, so that you'll get 0. In fact, we don't even mark it, so we'll return it back to you. So then we've agreed that AI should be used, it should be encouraged. It should be the base for the students to understand the concepts, just as a basis of learning. But what we're not going to accept is when students are using AI to ask it to give them problems, because we're going to figure that out. So I think there's one, just now don't have it next to me, but there's one that I saw. It's an AI tracking tool done by a student in Massachusetts. I think they call it ChatGPT 0. Yes, call it ChatGPT 0. So then you are able to pick up lots of these things. So I saw in the discussions there was BARD and ChatGPT. There's just so many of these tools. I think also then one of the discussions that we had was, okay, then you academics are using Grammarly as an example. Grammarly is an AI. It helps you to write better. English is not my first language. So then why would you refuse if they use ChatGPT as the base? So as you see, lots of these large language models coming through, these chatbots of some sort. So then we agree we're not going to win. So we need to encourage the students to use this thing as a base, to think as they write. So as for the percentage, so our school, for instance, uses 10% for both TII. TII is the Turnitin, and then the AI. So once it goes beyond 10%, so then your supervisor has to give you counsel and then show you how you can kind of improve. But we have decided that we're going to use AI as the base.
Thanks, Prof. Any other views on that from anyone else in the discussion? Any thoughts or views related to this? So I think this is certainly an area that is of much debate. So I'll comment from Da Vinci's perspective. As our perspective, one of the things that we've engaged with, very similar to you, Prof, is around, it is part of where we're going. So we very much embrace it. We look specifically at how someone has engaged or utilized it as well, to see in what way they have utilized it. But I think that very importantly, it's also about making sure that the policies of the institution really do embrace these changes. So we currently have a working group that's made up of faculty, Senate members, various other members, and external experts. And we're looking at how AI and plagiarism should be interwoven, should be dealt with, and actually be writing a specific AI policy connected to that. So we've obviously made provision for it within the policy, but we actually want a standalone policy connected to it with various other elements of how to bring it into the teaching and learning environment as well. So that's just another perspective. Anyone else want to comment your institution's perspective or your own personal thoughts? Please feel free to unmute your mics and comment. And then if people are wanting to engage in that discussion, happy to continue on that. But I think I've covered all the questions. Is there anyone's question I have not addressed, or you would like to raise a question? We do still have a bit of time with Prof Moloi and Prof Gerber, and I'm hoping that if you have any questions you'd like to ask, that you do ask your questions, raise your hand, open your mics and engage. Anyone? I think we've had a lot of robust discussion and a lot of conversation. So I'll just give it a few minutes to see if anyone would like to comment or can think of a question they'd like to ask. Okay, if there are no comments or questions, then Anne, I don't know if you want to discuss tomorrow's session as well as today's before I close off for the evening and thank our two presenters.
Thank you, Marla. I do agree it's been a robust discussion, and thank you so much to Tankiso and Charlene for sharing your insights and time. I know that the whole group has really appreciated that, and from SABSA side, we are delighted that you have come on board and really appreciate your engagement. I know that it's a huge amount of prep, or probably not because you've got so much experience, but we do know that this takes a lot of energy, and your willingness to actually engage with all of us is really great. So from SABSA side, I know that tomorrow's session is with Prof Benny Anderson and with Professor H.B. Klopper, and they are going to be dealing with a combination of masters and doctoral issues. So I'm not going to do a spoiler. You need to go back onto your sheet and see what we're going to be covering tomorrow, but it will be our last session for the week. We'll be issuing certificates of attendance in the spirit of ongoing professional learning for the higher education sector. And as I posted in the chat, we are in the process of building a supervisor database, which will be online via our website. And we are very excited about this. We've had a lot of interest in it and people wanting to come on board. And this program was also one of the ways that we were hoping that people will get some kind of guidance and stability in managing the process of supervision and external examinations amongst our 22 business schools. The database will be open to all business schools internationally. Actually, I've already discussed it with a number of global institutions, and they're willing to get on board. So I think this is quite exciting for our sector. On my side, I think I'm just delighted that everybody is here. Marla, thank you for your time. We always appreciate your energy and insight into what is happening. And I think that we've had a very, I think it's been an amazing session today. A lot of energy in the room, and we really appreciate that. So from my side, I'm Art, and look forward to seeing everyone at 3 o'clock tomorrow. It's the same link to get in. Okay.
Thanks so much, Anne. Thank you once again to Anne, the way that SABSA drives these initiatives. As you've said, I think it's incredible. Everybody's engaged. There's been robust debate. Yes, Janice, would you like to comment?
No, I was just saying thanks, Annie.
Oh, okay, no problem. Absolute pleasure.
Thank you.
So I just wanted to acknowledge our speakers. So Charlene and Tankiso, I want to say that you know, I love my quotes. So I saw a quote today from Mutasem Al-Gharati, and it spoke about the fact that knowledge is a commodity to be shared. Because in order for knowledge to pay dividends, it shouldn't remain the monopoly of the selected few. And I really think that the two of you have lived up to that, because it is not always willingness, there's not always a willingness from people to share as openly as you have. I mean, these are, as we've joked around, I mean, the peeled onion is yours, Charlene, and Tankiso, you know, the rubrics, etc., are yours. The fact that you are just so open to share that, to take your conceptualization forward, and to allow others to really be able to gain from this knowledge that you've disseminated, but just the free way in which you've been willing to share. I think that is the true mark of and a scholar. And if you look back at the history of universities and the purpose of scholarly study, it was really about this co-creation and sharing. So to the two of you, professors, you are certainly an example of what it means to disseminate and share knowledge and to help the broader community. So thank you for giving of yourselves, your knowledge, and your beautiful pictures, graphics, and thought processes. You are indeed scholars to be really held upon high, and thank you very much for your contribution, not only to SABSA, but to our country and to the continent and to the global discourse in terms of supervision. So thank you very much to the two of you. And then obviously for everyone that has joined, thank you so much for giving of yourselves, because you've also obviously given your thoughts, your views, you've been so open to engage. So thank you everyone. If any of you are traveling anywhere, I wish you safe travels, but we hope we see many of you tomorrow online. And thank you very much for this engagement, and we'll see you tomorrow at 3 o'clock. Same link, same place, different speakers. Thanks everyone.
Thank you so much.